Let's start the conversation looking at the global projection for the year 2024, which is put at 3.1%. But for Africa, it has to be 3.5%. What's your quick reaction to this, and what are the realities playing out in the last few months?
Okay. When you talk about growth, it is easier for small economies like African economies to grow faster than a huge behemoth like, say, that is in trillions of dollars. That's referring to the huge economies like America, China, and the rest of them. So typically, when you're looking at the global growth rate, the chances are that globally, by the time you factor in all these huge economies into it, the growth rate should not be as fast as emerging markets like Africa, small economies like Africa, where some of the GDP, some of the countries are probably $100 billion. So 3.1 for global and 3.5 for Africa is absolutely not out of it's a normal.
All right, let's look at the factors influencing the region's projected growth, which is 3.5%. One of them is the global slowdown, but we understand that this will have varying implications on African countries because of their different economic growth. How do you think is going to affect some of the countries? Let's start with Nigeria, for instance.
Okay, for Nigeria, one of the topmost growing countries in Africa, because of certain economic challenges that it is currently enmeshed in. So there is the debt burden, which is out there. There is the foreign exchange issues, which is out there. There is the inflation, which has been very high. Nigeria is not likely to be one of the countries that will be able to do the 3.5, predicted for Africa by virtue of all this distortion that I've mentioned. However, there are other countries in Africa that are less burdened by some of these challenges that I spoke about. So those countries have a better chance that they can do 3.5 or even 3.7. And by the time you average everything together, you can arrive at about that 3.5. Most of this report also give allowances to certain elements of unpredictability that may happen, in which case growth may be higher than it is expected by virtue of certain factors that may just pop in that could not have been envisaged at the time the predictions were being made, which is why from time to time, you do have a revision to the projections that have been made at a point in time when those factors that could change the prediction start to come into play. So if we look at, say, a Nigerian growth and all the burdens that are currently on top of it, if sometime along the line, our crude productions increases, it might change the dynamics. If we're able to bring the refineries into our commercial production, both the private refinery and the public refineries, that may begin to change things dramatically also for Nigeria. So factors do pop up that could change predictions, and that is why those predictions are revised over in the course of the year.
Let me point your attention to the projection being made by the Economics Intelligence Unit, which projects Africa to be the second growing continent in the year 2024. And that growth, according to this research body, is going to be influenced by the service sector. How do you see this playing out in coming months?
Well, the service sector has been a clear leader as the real sector of the economy has slowed down dramatically over the years. If you take a peek at the financial reports of quoted companies in 2023, you will see that while the manufacturing sector, whether it is the breweries or it is the food manufacturing, FMCG, while they're all posting, most of them posted massive loss. If you just take a walk to the financial services, you see a totally different ballgame. The banks have been cruising home with massive profits. On the other side, that is service. So the recovery of the real sector is not likely to be as fast enough as to be a leading light for growth in Nigeria or for most part of Africa for that matter. So what we're going to see is that it is still services, whether it is telecommunications, financial services, that will be the leading light as far as growth is concerned, especially in 2024. And even going forward, but for us as a country, I believe that we need to look at what is going on in the real sector so that we can have production in the real sector to complement whatever is going to happen in the service sector.
All right, going along that line, apart from the service sector, the areas of opportunities for Africa, we also have agriculture, which Africa is supposed to have comparative advantage. But from what we've seen, it's not really that, because there's still food insecurity in Africa. But it has the potential of actually using that area to grow its economy. So what needs to change? What can be done to turn agriculture to a real advantage for Africa?
Okay, we can approach that at two levels. One is at the level of agriculture in itself, the primary production. Now, primary production in Africa generally, and I will even say particularly in a place like Nigeria with huge agricultural potential, is bedeviled by a number of issues. So I take a Nigerian situation, for example. We have problem with yield. So the yield per hectare of our production in Nigeria is very poor. So if you take any product category, whether it is maize or rice, anything that we produce, and you compare the yield per hectare in Nigeria with, say, a South Africa or, say, Egypt, you'll be amazed at how poor the yield of our agricultural product is concerned. So we need to deal with the issues of yield. Number two, and what are the things driving yield? Part of the things driving yield include research and development. Are we investing in research and development? Are the farmers having access to the kind of seed and seedlings that could produce the kind of yield that we need? What about the farming practices? Are we improving the farming practices, and are we able to cut this over to the smallholder farmers who incidentally do a lot of production in a place like Nigeria? Then after you leave the primary production issues, you now have to talk about issues around infrastructure. So storage. A lot of agricultural product produced in Nigeria get rotten. In certain product categories, this is as high as 40, 50% of what is produced, because there are no storage infrastructure. The disconnect between the centers of production and the centers of consumption are there. The rural roads are horrible. If you want to do partial processing to elongate the shelf life of some of this product, there is no electricity to do it. So there are multiple layers of problem affecting primary production in itself. Then on top of that is the issue of value add. It is going to be difficult for a country to become rich just by producing primary products. It's the same way as saying you are producing crude oil. Why can't you produce refined product as well? So value addition in the space of agri is important for sustainability of production in Africa. For sustainability of the contribution to GDP in Africa, we must add value to primary product. That is, rather than focus on producing cocoa and shipping it to Switzerland or Netherlands for chocolate, maybe we should think about how can we add value to cocoa and export value-add product instead of primary product. Instead of exporting crude oil, that is deviating from even agric now, we should think of exporting refined product. The space of value addition is a very important space for growing the economy. We should not allow ourselves to be reduced to producers of primary agricultural product. The space of value adding is very, very critical to grow.
All right, now let's look at how the destruction in the global supply chain and logistics, how it has affected Africa. You're aware of the Red Sea attacks and then the ongoing invasion of Ukraine, the crisis between Russia and Ukraine. How has that impacted global supply chain? And in particular, let's look at Africa and by extension, Nigeria.
Of course, because Nigeria and most part of Africa are heavily dependent when it comes to what they eat and what we use all around. Because of that, anything that disrupts global logistic environment will affect us as a country. The other time I saw bakers protesting somewhere. I think it was in Plateau, somewhere where they were protesting. What were they protesting? They were protesting the rise in the price of bread, of wheat, which is what bread is made from. But the question is, what percentage of the wheat that we consume in Nigeria do we produce in Nigeria? Maybe we produce up to 5%. Definitely much less than 10% of what we consume in wheat is what we produce. So whatever affects the price of wheat globally will affect the price of bread in Nigeria automatically. So when some of the largest producers in the world, the Ukraine, the Russians of this world, got caught up in the war situation and logistics around, wheat became a matter of global negotiation, there is no way a country like Nigeria will not be at the front of that kind of a scenario. And the question for us is, can we produce wheat in Nigeria? The answer is yes. There has been certain part of the country that has been found to be conducive for the production of wheat. But what we are focused on is what I call the easy way out. It is easy to just import and bring it. Why bother to do cultivation? There's a lot of risk involved in agriculture anyway, so why do I want to bother myself? Let's just keep importing. And that is what we have been doing. So we need to look into the space of how some of these global problems affect us. Look at where we have competence within the country and unleash our competence to be able to count for us in those areas. Let me also add that I know that we will not have comparative advantage in all areas. And in those areas where we do not have, then we need to find alliances that will work for us in those areas. The global challenges also typically present opportunities. Every challenge that you see in that manner is an opportunity. If Russia and Ukraine are at war and wheat is affected, it's an opportunity for us to look inward and say, what can we do about wheat cultivation in Nigeria? If there is a supply of fuel and gas, supply of gas to Europe is affected by the Russia-Ukraine war, we must be asking ourselves, oh, we are a gas nation, actually. We have so much gas, we have so much oil. What opportunities does it portend for us? And how can we begin to build and, into the future that can leverage on that kind of an opportunity? So we must see it from those two sides. Look inward for solutions and see what opportunities those global challenges represent. Leverage on them. I'm not saying that some of these things lend themselves to microwave solution, but if we have the thinking, if we have the vision, then we can chart the route towards where we think we want to be as far as this issue is concerned.
Let's look at the implication of the global supply chain disruption on exports of resources from Africa, because many African countries export natural resources abroad. But if there's a problem with the global supply chain, what does that mean for Africa?
I don't think it has significantly affected Africa. What is the contribution of Africa to global export anyway? Of course, we do a lot of natural resources for which the world give us the price. Give it, take it or leave it. Crude exportation in Nigeria, for example, we cannot complain that our problem is that we've not been able to export our crude, or that our cocoa will not get to the Netherlands we want to export. So I don't think that the global logistic challenges have affected exports that much. What the problem has been, which has not really changed fundamentally, is what exactly are we exporting, apart from crude in Nigeria, for example? What else? What else are we exporting in the kind of measure that will have an impact, say, on our foreign exchange earnings, apart from crude? Even the crude, we are unable to produce. When last did we meet our OPEC quota for crude production? The ones that we produce, a chunk of it were being stolen at some point. At least the light that we are beginning to see a rise in production. But even the rise in production is still far away from what we are expected to produce. So if I take Nigeria as an example for Africa, the global logistic problem has not stopped our export, has not been a significant negative effect on our export.
Let's look at some of the projections that are peculiar to African countries. A good example is that of Egypt. Maybe we'll start with that. The projection for this year is 3.1%. And the projection is the growth is going to reduce to 3.14 from 4.2% being experienced same time in the year 2023. And the reason for this is going to be to scarcity of forests, which is not different from what is happening in Nigeria. Now, looking at the reference and taking example for what is happening in Egypt as we speak, how do we create a narrative for Africa, then making reference to Egypt, and also an example for Nigeria, looking at the impact of the scarcity of forests and how it's going to play out in a few months? How do you...
Well, I think the challenge for Africa is that of competitiveness. So if I take Egypt, interestingly, Egypt is also heavily burdened by debt. The debt to GDP ratio in Egypt is nothing to be excited about. So is the total debt profile of Egypt. So some of these things have implication, because a chunk of those of the debt that we're talking about are also foreign exchange denominated. So servicing them, sometimes having to get more of those debts, put a burden on not just Egypt, but even most countries across Africa. The way out, in my opinion, is for African countries, Egypt, Nigeria, name them, to continue to look at how we can become more competitive in the global arena, be able to have more and more to offer to the globe and earn more foreign exchange. Beyond that, Africa must also begin to look inwards and measure itself by what it will like to see. The biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges, in my opinion, about how Africa, plan its future or envision its own future, is to dwell on data from the World Bank, from the IMF, and all the other global institutions. Yes, all these institutions are present with us across the world. But Africa in itself must begin to ask, what do I seek to achieve? How do I want to measure those things that I want to achieve using my understanding of the peculiarities of my environment? I'll give you an example. Poverty, if you spend less than $1, they said, oh, that is a measure of being poor. But $1 in Egypt, in Nigeria, in the UK, some of these things are not comparable at all. There is even no basis for the comparison. So why do I want to measure my poverty with the capacity to spend $1 or its equivalent? Maybe there are other things that are closer to me that I need to look at And if I pay attention to those things, I might be able to make an improvement on more people, on the lives of my people, more than using certain global information that is available. At a certain point in time, some of the growth that Nigeria recorded, for example, were not inclusive. So we saw people, I remember one of our presidents said, oh, because there were so many private jets, that can't you see that the prosperity? To him, that was a measure of the fact that Nigeria was prospering. But those who have the real numbers know that the growth you were experiencing even then was a growth affecting a segment of the society, while a majority at the bottom of the ladder were not growing, or were not growing at close to the same rate at all. So it's okay to look at international data. It's okay to be able to leverage on whatever we can gather from there. But as Africans, as Egypt, as Nigeria, as other people, we must also build our world around what we would like to see based on the peculiarity of our society.
Talking about building Africa around what Africa wants to see. Now, it is recommended that one of the things that will take Africa there is increased regional integration and trade agreements. How do you see that happening in spite of the difference in African countries, some of them wanting to play solo and not much cooperation like was seen in West Africa, where some countries left the ECOWAS?
Well, it is quite unfortunate. Africa doesn't even trade with and trade within ourselves. So you look at the trade between, say, Nigeria and some of the top European countries, and you want to put that beside, say, Nigeria and Ghana, or Nigeria and South Africa, and you'll be amazed at the huge disparity. So, like you said, Africa must be deliberate about trading amongst itself. Then there are all sort of conflicts that are going on in Africa, some of which have been escalated, some of which might even be sponsored. You know, the consciousness in recent time, I mean, you mentioned the ECOWAS issue. The ECOWAS issue with some of the countries in West Africa is even escalating further. We've seen a situation in which Niger, recently, a couple of days ago, had said, no, I won't even allow flights from Nigeria to fly over my country, and all those kind of stuff. So who are going to be the beneficiaries of this kind of discourse? It is the outside world that will be. So Africa must resolve African conflict. Africa must get more deliberate about integration. So the AFTA, that we signed some years ago, when we ask ourselves today, what are the benefits that has come from that agreement that we signed? We may not be able to point at much. A country like Nigeria, with its resources in oil and gas, can be the producer of refined petroleum products for Africa, for West Africa. The kind of agricultural resources that Nigeria has been blessed with, we can feed the entire West Africa. So why are we not doing that? Why is our countries within Africa not leveraging on comparative advantages that they may have to produce goods and services to service Africa and help to build each other's economy? It is a $1 million question that is out there. But I think leaders across Africa must strive to pay attention to these things, because in it lies the redemption of Africa. The continuous reliance that it is the outside world that is coming to help Africa is a misplaced confidence, and it will never take Africa forward beyond where we are.
Interesting. You know, earlier we talked about the projection for Egypt, and now let's look at what is going to play out for South Africa. The projection for South Africa for the year 2024 is that the persistent energy crisis is going to slow down economic growth in that country. This seems to be, peculiar to African countries, similar to what is happening in Nigeria. of how much of influence, when it comes to the issue of energy crisis, does it have on economic growth? And what should be the way forward for African countries looking at the persistent energy crisis that has lingered over the year?
Yeah, an energy crisis, while it is okay to say, for some years it has been global, because we saw what happened in Europe by virtue of the Russia-Ukraine war, and how that created a massive, massive problem for those economies that they are still getting out of it gradually. South Africa is an interesting case. South Africa is that country that has probably the largest electricity production in Africa, over 58,000 megawatts of energy. And that country with that volume, I mean, don't talk. Nigeria has about 4,000, we are told. 4,000 that could go down to as low as 2,500 from time to time. No. So when you have 58,000 megawatts of electricity for less than 60 million people, but because of the industrialization level in South Africa, a chunk of this 58,000 goes into those industrial areas. So their mining sector, their steel sector, and general industries are where a chunk of this thing go into. So South Africa has found itself in a situation in which it started to ration electricity over the past few years. South Africa is also heavily burdened by debt. If you want to make light the debt of Nigeria, you go and look at the debt of South Africa. In absolute terms, the debt of South Africa is not less than twice that of Nigeria in absolute terms. So South Africa would definitely struggle a little bit by virtue of those things, but I believe it is trying to work at it, both the debt burden that is there, as well as the energy crisis, which has bedeviled it over the last few years. So it's expected, so to say, that the energy crisis will impinge on how growth will come out of South Africa. Unfortunately, I don't think there is a microwave solution to it. So we'll have to wait it out and continue to build gradually into the position it would like to see itself in terms of energy.
So how can the growing population of many African countries and also having a young population, how can that be channeled into growth?
The energy of the youth, both physical and mental, has to be properly harnessed, nurtured, harvested, and deployed. As it is today, in most part of Africa, we're not able to do much with that. Of course, in certain areas like entertainment, we've been able to do something. But I would love to see a great improvement in what we're able to do in the tech, in the ICT space. We're all witnesses to the visit of Mark Zuckerberg to Sabo in Nigeria some years ago. Why did the man left America and took a walk on the street of Lagos without fanfare? There are certain information that he was privy to about certain activities taking place in certain parts of Nigeria. And the question that came to my mind is, how well has Nigeria itself leveraged on that kind of information that brought a Mark Zuckerberg from America to Sabo in Lagos? Can Africa, can in Nigeria envision itself as a hub producing IT professionals, programmers, web developers, IT security people for the entire sub-region, or even globally? See, the cost of producing these people, of course, we know that most of their examinations are international and all of that. But cost is cheaper in a place like Nigeria, we need to focus the energy of the youth, even the training, even our education, in the direction of what Nigeria needs, what the globe needs. Those are the kind of things that will help us, skill and be able to incentivize the kind of education that we want, so that we probably produce more technology-oriented, the STEM, science, technology, kind of courses, and reduce production of graduates of religious studies and some of the other courses. I'm not saying those courses are not needed. I'm saying they might not be needed in the quantity that we are rolling them out today. So let's start from the education, producing skills that are required for the vision of the country and for the global space. What does the world need? What does Nigeria need? Let that be the driver of the kind of skills that we produce. And when we do that, we'll be able to unleash the capacity of the young people mentally and physically, and channel this energy in the right direction that will be productive for us as a country.
All right, interesting. We've talked about Egypt, we've talked about South Africa. Now let's look at Nigeria. The projection for Nigeria is that the oil reforms being undertaken by the present government is going to make huge impact on the economic outlook for the year 2024. Now, you're aware of what happened in the year 2023 with the removal of fuel subsidy. How much of impact are we still having as regards to removal of subsidy for the year 2024? And then what are some of the critical steps you're expecting the government to take as regards the oil sector in order to improve the economic growth for the year?
Okay. I have no doubt in my mind that we needed to remove fuel subsidy. It was a correct policy. It shouldn't also be surprising that even literally all the major political leaders, contestants for presidency 2023, said they were going to remove subsidy. However, where I have a bit of concern is that it did not appear to me as if the consequences of the removal, that there was a robust plan to deal with the consequences of that removal. And that is why the pressure is still there, even as we speak. So we've not been able to manage that process as effectively as we ought to have been able to.
Earlier, you were making your points as regards the oil reforms in Nigeria, making reference to the removal of fuel subsidy and then how that will play out in the year 2024. And I remember I also asked you to talk about some of the critical steps the federal government needs to take to ensure that that sector is being reformed, because you know that once the oil sector sneezes in Nigeria, every other sector catches cold. So you can continue with your thoughts. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. So fuel subsidy, we've started that policy, removal of fuel subsidy. We now need to pick the pieces of the consequences and fix them. I know it's not going to be an easy fix. This is something we have enjoyed probably for about 40 years. So when you take away something that people have enjoyed for about 40 years, it's not easy to fix. But things around alternative energy, things around cushioning effects, like the need to review workers' salary, minimum wage, and all the rest of it, are things we must close out clinically to be able to help moderate the effect, the consequences of that action. Well, upon removal of fuel subsidy, we started to see how the question we must begin to ask is, that additional money that is being pumped into the economy, how is it playing out in that space? There have been all sort of unconfirmed reports about how even political leaders in certain states when they saw this money, oh, this is so much money than we used to have. What they were doing was taking the money to the go and start purchasing dollars in the market, thereby raising up the value of dollar against the naira, literally betting against the naira on a continuous basis. There are also issues around speculation that were fueled by all this plenty money all over the world. How the monetary authorities will help to manage speculations and all this unhealthy betting against the naira is left for the government to take care of. On the other side are issues around the refineries. When this project was initially being conceived, one of the comforts that the majority of people were asking for is that the government refineries should be working. So we've heard the news about mechanical completion of some of these refineries, particularly the Port Harcourt refinery was set to be mechanically completed in December. But mechanical completion does not put fuel in the tank of the consumers in Nigeria. It is the commercial production. So Nigerians are waiting for these public refineries to go into commercial production so that we can have the benefits that are meant to come with this. What are these benefits? There are certain logistic costs that will be avoided because you're not bringing the fuel from Spain or Brazil. Well, the refined product from Spain or Brazil or wherever we buy. Rather, we are getting the fuel from our own backyard in Port Harcourt, using the Port Harcourt refinery as an example. That should save us a little bit of logistic cost, LC cost. You're not established letter of credit to do that. And those little costs should begin to count for the people. The other part is that if we put all this refinery to work, to commercial production, the chances are that we will produce much more than we consume. Don't forget that some of the data we hear of in that space about how much we consume might not be true. Some of them are being driven by the corruption that fuel subsidy nurtured. Fuel subsidy is a dark hole. The regime of fuel subsidy is a dark hole of unaccountability. And some of those consumption that are spoken about might not even be real. So if we produce more refined product than we consume, it gives us an opportunity to export. If we export, we will earn foreign exchange. These are some of the things that will help us to get out of the hole that and I hope we can sustain it. The speed has not been that fantastic. It has been a very slow crawl out of the hole. But when we remember that this country, sometimes in 2005, had a production that was almost 2.5 million barrels per day. How did we get to 1.3 million barrels? And what can we do to begin to rev it up faster to a level that will help us meet our own internal needs? Because even the internal needs of the refineries now are not being met. We don't even have the crude to meet the internal needs of the refinery. Not to talk of being able to now export and earn more foreign exchange by exporting the production. So whatever we can do to continue to production in Nigeria are areas of concentration that I believe the government should do.
In the interim, while Nigeria still battles oil theft and how to increase its production quota, how can crude availability be guaranteed for local refineries? The Dangote refinery that just started, and even the Port Harcourt refinery and other refineries that are planned to be revamped and harnessed, like the modern refineries, what is the guarantee of crude availability for them?
There are no guarantees for now, because it appears as if we have pledged, the federal government has pledged its own share of crude production in some of the transactions that it did. Therefore, for in the immediate, there is no guarantee that we can provide crude. However, The problem is already on the ground, and we know that a solution is to increase production. So our effort should be geared towards everything that will help us increase production, reduce oil theft, so that we can have feedstock for our refineries and we can have more crude to export and make some income.